Welcome to my presentation. A picture's worth 1,000 words, but whose words? I think about this all the time because we live in a culture that is visual, but with so much of what we see is presented to us in a constant fire hose of images, but rarely do we get to take things in and, ponder them. So, as I like to say sometimes, images everywhere, but not a thing to see. So in a way, one of the goals of this presentation is to discuss slowing things down, look at some images, share some stories related to the images, and to talk about maybe conscious curation. And as we go through each slide, I'll try to explain some details about the images themselves if there's a story lacking with them. This image was taken during Occupy Wall Street, Manhattan, so quite a number of years back. But I love a lot of things about it because on the right arm, he has love written, and on the left arm, he has the number of his lawyer. And so it's sort of like the serenity of a simple message of love balanced against the anticipation of potential disorder. As was mentioned in my bio, my grandmother Rosalia, who is the one here pictured on her bed, on the bed shortly before her death, is the one who probably most influenced me in getting interested in photography, though she was neither a photographer or someone who was involved in visual arts. Though she wasn't a photographer, she was two things. She was a storyteller and a caregiver. And as mentioned, during the war, World War II, she was a Red Cross nurse for the Italian Red Cross and gave care to British POWs. And the stories about the war were incredibly vivid, starkly visual, and she could describe the ice she felt in her blood watching Nazi atrocities and the joy that they took from committing them, as well as the terror she felt as American bombs fell as the US made its way up Italy. For a brief time, she was held captive by the Nazis under suspicion of treason for passing intelligence from the POW hospital where she was working. She was nearly killed because she could not prove her innocence and was only saved because a priest with a conscience confessed to being the one responsible for passing the intelligence. Unfortunately, he was killed. But as a kid, later on in life, walking with her along 8th Avenue in Brooklyn, where we lived, pulling her little shopping cart, she never missed an opportunity to talk to anybody. And she always treated them with respect, was always curious, and didn't care about their station in life, if they had money, color of their skin, religion. She had just no bias at all and was very open to talking to anybody. And this time was, taking place during the 1970s. And so if you know anything about New York at that time, it was a place of disarray, rife with homelessness, crime, and vandalism. And as I accompanied her down these streets, one of the things that I really learned from her manner was to listen, but I also learned that there was a lot of pain in the world. And she taught me to slow down and observe, be engaged in people's stories, be non-judgmental. And, at the time, she made me conscious that I should want to do something about these injustices as she saw them. This picture is a picture I took in Los Angeles 5 or 6 years ago of a homeless man named Troy who suffers from hallucinations. And based on my various encounters with him over time, I'm not a psychologist or a mental health professional, but he does seem to suffer from potentially things like schizophrenia. I'm not really sure. So getting back to the narrative, I'd like to tell you that those walks with my grandmother, made me find photography instantly, and that I've been a committed photojournalist ever since. But that's not actually what happened, and it's not even entirely how my life is now, as it's a mix of photography and having a regular gig. So while my grandmother was supportive of me in many ways, including my desire to be a photographer, no one else in my family was. And in fact, everyone discouraged this path as being too dangerous, but more specifically, not financially viable, which is a big thing, a measure of success in I think, many families. And, there was sort of the prevailing thing, well, are you even any good at it? And so sadly, because of these words and perhaps of my own self-doubt at various moments, I've interrupted this visual journey many times. But the itch, the need to create, the desire to make a difference has never left me. And so I've really tried to be as true to that as possible. But it wasn't until Instagram came along that it really reignited my passion for taking images and the ability to give me an audience. It allowed me to connect with many kinds of like-minded people who cared about the same issues I did, but not just locally, but globally. And it served as a platform for being able to share my work. And it made me start to think that I might be able to make a difference by sharing what I encountered just through my everyday travels in the world. And it's, you know, because of this, it's allowed me to talk about issues like income equality through protest movements like Occupy Wall Street, to think about what kind of future we might want for our children in the world with, you know, so many issues related to income, education, climate. It's allowed me to go to places like Thailand and cover the red shirt protests over many years, which is a part of a political movement following a 2006 coup in Thailand. To bear witness to the changes that people are trying to make through Black Lives Matter, which when the movement first started in 2014 was mainly and mostly comprised of people of color. But as things have evolved and changed, it's included white Americans standing for Black lives, up to and including women from the suburbs who were quite willing and tear gassed by our government. But as the protests over the course of 2020 showed, we have a very long way to go, both in terms of police reform and matters of race. Another area that I've gotten to work on is women's empowerment. As a father with a daughter and 2 sons, I've always been thinking about women's empowerment, how to give my daughter a voice, and what kind of men I want my children to be, my sons to be. And while this is a real cause of concern for me as a parent, they seem like first world problems compared to other parts of the world where opportunity is difficult to find. This picture was taken in a remote Rwandan village. The 3 women, there are 3 women of 3 generations of one family. Bernadette, 50 on the left, Marianne, 76 in the middle, and Ernestine, 23 on the right. When the Rwandan genocide hit their small town, Ernestine's father and uncles were killed, and her remaining family had to hide in the forest for over a month, foraging to survive. I was lucky to meet them because I was helping a colleague in Rwanda who was working with a college called the Akila Institute for Women. And we were trying to put together a fundraising book for them. The Institute worked with local and regional employers to reverse engineer curriculum so that graduates could easily be placed with high-paying jobs. And when these jobs took place, they often paid 5 times the median wage. The school's intent was to teach leadership, entrepreneurship, IT, and management skills. And the idea that being women who would go through this program could grow their own economic opportunities, but because of the way that women in that society tend to stay in their villages, that the benefits of the skills that they learned would be retained within the community, and that would benefit everyone. And I would not have had this opportunity were it not for Instagram, because that's how I was able to connect with people. So one aspect of photography for me, though, is making sense of the world around me and learning more about the things I don't agree with or don't understand, confronting my views, talking with people I disagree with, challenging myself to listen fully, and more importantly, to present people who allow you into their lives, to treat them with dignity, respect, so that you can attempt to try and capture their essence as closely as possible. You know, that's hard to do visually. And so I also think an important thing is that you want to learn as much about them so that you can convey who they are. And this often comes through the form of narrative stories. And the one thing is, you know, when you try to make these images, you never really want to mock or put your subjects in a poor light. And the thing that I really want to avoid most of all, particularly when working with people who might be disadvantaged, is to fall into the trap of something that I recently heard referred to in a Netflix movie called the 40-year-old version. You don't want to fall into something called poverty porn, where you're making images of people who are not advantaged or have, are on the fringe. But you're, I don't know, it's sort of a kind of voyeurism, and you're really looking to avoid it. So over time, I started to accumulate and write down stories and words of people I encountered. So with this in mind, I want to share some of these images and some of these stories, some long, some brief, and through their words, I hope you'll see the people that you meet differently. And I've never done it. I've never done this presentation quite this way, where I've read the stories. I don't do recordings of the people that I meet because I'm too busy photographing. But hopefully you can bear with my my narration, and hopefully this will work. So the first story is Bobby. He's the first person I ever did one of these stories on. So Bobby's an alcoholic by admission, but he says he's not in recovery, rather that he's in self-aware indulgence. He did go to the hospital for help, but he says they told him it was self-inflicted and they wouldn't help him. It's not self-inflicted. It's a disease, he insists. Before he lost his job and then his house, Bobby worked in a cemetery as a groundskeeper. Now he lives on the streets and sleeps in a car park, spending his mornings sobering up, quietly contemplating life on the grounds of the Brompton Cemetery near Earl's Court. We talk extensively walking around the cemetery grounds, with him showing me where the famous and not so famous are buried. We come across the headstone of the Who's former manager, Kit Lambert. What did he die of, I ask? Too much indulgence. We arrived at the statue of an angel, and he asks me if I'll take a picture of him and his girl, which I oblige. We walk some more, and I see him looking at envy at the groundskeepers, clearing weeds, a job he clearly wishes he could return to. I notice a tear in his eye. Are you crying? I ask. Actually, no, I have conjunctivitis, he says. But a lot of people ask this question. But ironically, I do cry from time to time. And when I do that, people usually say, you poor dear, do you have conjunctivitis? No, I'm crying. I ask what people are like in terms of treating the homeless in London. I've been kicked and urinated upon, but one time a lady arrived unannounced with food on a silver tray. You get all kinds, I guess, he concludes. This is an image of Charles. When I run into Charles, he's heading down to the LA Mission on 5th Street, carrying his belongings and 3 highly fatigued shopping bags. Originally from Milwaukee, he came to LA in 2000 and has been living on the street since. When I ask if I can take his picture, he decides yes, but he wants to do it with his accordion, saying that if we're going to take a photo, it should be proper. He works on a tune, and though it isn't polished, he clearly derives enjoyment from it. This was taken in Mumbai. Raji is 23, homeless, and has lived on the street his entire life. He's now raising 2 kids of his own on the same street where he grew up, adjacent to the Gateway of India. He says that he has no life. It is only about making money and food. We sleep on the street. The police come at night, beat us, throw away our belongings. No reasons. This area belongs to the government, but I get up every day to try and make money and bring my family food. As we talk longer, I asked him if he was able to do anything he wanted. What would he do? He's clearly confused by the question and lists a number of things he tries to make money at. I attempt to ask this several different ways, and finally he understands, saying simply, oh, I don't dream like that. I simply would do anything to take care of my family. Raji has a very accepting and calm manner about him. In fact, when I crushed an ant that had been on my hand, he chastised me for doing so, saying that even a small life is a life. It must be treated with respect. Without doubt, I conclude, I felt stupid and humbled. This is a picture in Los Angeles taken of Sea Star, AKA the Dynasty. And he's a rapper originally from Crawford, Texas. While keeping an eye out for the bus he's been waiting for, he does a simple flow for me. Out of nowhere, he tells me the police think he's a drug dealer, but to prove his innocence, he unzips his jacket. If I were, would I be wearing this? He says, revealing his cross. This is maybe one of my favorite stories. This is a story about Tony. Pointing to the tree behind him, Tony calls it the tree of life. He walks around reading the inscriptions and describing the fates of each of his friends. T, that's me, I'm still here. Sideways was killed by a drunk driver. Come up on this curb and run him over, Tony laments. It's not clear if the name Sideways was the result of the accident or for the nefarious acts Tony described him committing. As for the other, one guy was in prison for murder, another died of a heart attack, another died of AIDS. One guy just left to Utah, Tony thought. After a while, Tony teared up, saying that it was actually a sad tree. There's been so much blood on this corner, you can't see it because the rain has washed it all away. Not every encounter I have goes so smoothly, and sometimes they're quite dramatic. This is a picture of Pat in Los Angeles. Pat patrols the summit of the 6th Street Bridge in LA Arts District ferociously, like a pit bull ready to maul any who cross her path. Shooing away any passerby with a hail of profane curses where C and F bombs flow liberally, she looks at me and suddenly says with perfect clarity, "Take my picture. I need them for my passport." I quickly snap 4 shots, then I ask her if she actually lives on this bridge. "Shut up and take the picture," she exclaims. "No questions, you fucking whore paparazzi." This picture, titled "The Madness of King George." George rolls up with his shopping cart, which is adorned with thorns and a teddy bear. He periodically pricks himself with the thorns to remind himself of the realness of life. The teddy bear might just be for luck, I'm not sure. Floating in and out of a cogent state, he talks fluently on the one hand about his past, how his full name is George Rogers Siegel, how he'd been a litigation attorney, that he's 66. On the other hand, he rambles, talking about the Office Collective and plots. The plot is what we've got. How many brain cells are acting on their own thoughts to pursue their own plots? A thought of circumstance? About 20 years ago, he was run over by a car, and I suppose that might have been the moment of schism for him. He asked for a donation, and I give him $1, which he hides within his rolling tobacco. Rolling a cigarette, he lights up. This one's titled "Cotton Balls." Steve came from Indiana by way of Florida 3 years ago, where he'd undertaken the burden of helping his ex-wife with some property. "I'm sorry I ever did," he says. "Married 5 times, she ran off with the realtor." These days, he panhandles along the old strip in Las Vegas, politely wishing passersby a lovely day, and to those who will listen, a short joke. But life hasn't always been funny, as after serving in Vietnam as part of Naval Air Support, he founded a painting business that he lost after having his skull bashed in. His right eye developed glaucoma, and he lost it to blindness. He said that the other day, a woman was walking along the strip, handing out $5 bills to each of the panhandlers dressed in costume, including fake Elvises, Marilyns, and other icons. Upon coming to Steve, she said, "I can't give you anything because you're not in costume." All he could say was, "I'm real, I'm from Vietnam." But he takes it with grace, ending with a joke. "Why can't you hear rabbits making love?" Well, it's because they have cotton balls. This is taken in Butare, Rwanda. When you first meet Claudine, 22, you're struck by her infectious smile and energy. She is someone who literally cannot stop smiling despite from coming of an area of Rwanda where the economic prospects are thin for men and virtually non-existent for women. Determined to improve her outcome, she's presently enrolled in the Akila Institute for Women, located in Kigali, where she has completed the first of 3 years in a hospitality program. We talk a good deal about the program, but the meat of the matter is that she hopes to do through this course. So I ask her what her dreams are. "I grew up in this area. It's kind of a village. I could see that they couldn't treat the boys and girl children the same. It would hurt me. I could feel that this was unfair. Why do people treat me like this? If someone gives birth to a baby girl, it's like a curse in the family. They wouldn't give the same value to girls. They would give this high value to the baby boy, but for a girl is never going to give me something. A girl is never going to succeed, never going to be successful, never going to give back what I've been helping her, but I want to grow. Maybe I'll become a leader somewhere. Maybe I'll help to empower women. I'll help people take away that stereotype. I want to go to America. I want to know as much as I can of English so that one day I can be an interpreter and can help some people that can't speak English. Maybe I'll help my family, my community, all sorts of things. This was taken in Tokyo in a place called Shinjuku Park, and it's a botanical garden. And so this is about Sagawa Mieko. So though blind since birth, Sagawa Mieko loves the feel, smell, and sounds of nature. Every month, she and her friends who are also blind gather as part of an organization called Nature Feeling. Paired with a seer, they walk throughout Shinjuku Park, located in central Tokyo, touching plants, examining textures, listening to birds, smelling fragrances, experiencing life to its fullest. Embracing my presence, she puts my photography to a group vote where I was voted 4-1 and allowed to take pictures of the consenting members. She then had me stand next to a cherry blossom tree, spread out my hands, and asked me if I felt the aura and energy the tree was giving off. And sure enough, much to my surprise, as I held my palms out about 6 inches away, I was embraced by the tree's warmth and energy. As a photographer, vision is an imperative, but the true sight and insight comes from within, and Mrs. Sagawa has given me a completely new perspective on how it's derived. So I took this one a few days ago, just before Joe Biden was confirmed president. The first question Sharon asked me when I approached her near her area across from the American Embassy is whether I'm a Democrat or a Republican. Not sure how to yet read the answer might be received. I'm answered that I'm neither. Oh, good, she says with relief. I ask her if there's a protest of some kind going to happen, but she simply explains that her and her friends are live streaming in support of Trump. We are in danger from Biden, she tells me. How so? I ask. Biden and Kamala Harris are spies for China, and we are in danger from communism. If we don't do something, Korea will be taken over by Chinese communism. And like dominoes, like other countries like Japan will fall. Do you know about the Illuminati? Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton are part of the Illuminati. They are evil and have sex with children, and they even sacrifice them, she explains. How can your country live with this? She asks with deep, trembling alarm and sincerity in her voice. Listen, she pleads, you must study this. She shares her concerns about the election, how Georgia was stolen, and that Trump is important for small business because he's such a great businessman himself. I ask her what she does for a living. I used to be a tutor, she says, but now I'm a full-time freedom fighter. The point, I guess, of all of this is that everyone has a story, but how do you start a conversation with a total stranger? I usually start with a smile, which has become so much harder in the time of Corona, as we are now wearing 2 masks, the one which hides our soul and the one which hides our face. But no matter how unapproachable people seem, I have found that people really want to connect and share. Sometimes the smile doesn't work, and it might be a cigarette instead. The point is to earnestly try and connect with the people around you. And if people see that sincerity in you, they will give you sincerity back. For me, and maybe if you're into photography, I think it's also important to always carry a camera. The good news is that now, almost anyone can do it because it's built into your phone. And the reason I do this is because you never know what's going to happen. This picture was taken, I was just in a walk in Jakarta, Indonesia, on my way to a music festival, saw this big plume of smoke, and then I ended up in the middle of a fire that left 1,200 people homeless. And you never know what you're going to see. I think, life and the world around us is beautiful, but I think it requires two things, which is, an open mind and, I guess, open eyes and open ears. And so you never know what you're going to see or who you're going to meet. So I talked about curation. I just wanted to make a couple recommendations. If you like these kinds of stories and you like learning about the world, I thought I would recommend a few specific feeds. Humans of New York, which is some really compelling personal narratives that people supply images about family members that made a big difference in their life. Peter Turnley, who's a pretty well-known photojournalist, and he's been really influential in my life from a young age, but has really done incredible work covering the coronavirus. A gentleman named Eric Talmadge, who unfortunately died last year, but you can still visit his feed. He used to be the AP bureau chief in North Korea, and I think gave an incredible vignette into that world. Bill Shapiro, who was at one time an editor for Time, and curates really new and interesting feeds that I think are nice to look at, and will expose you to all kinds of different new types of photography. Iruchi PS, who has beautiful images every day and usually some kind of short poem or thought. And I think it's just something that makes you feel good. Groundbreaking Girls, which is run by a lady who paints portraits of influential women and shares their stories. So if you're into learning about important women that you may have never heard of, she's great at doing that. And then David Gutenfelder, who is a National Geographic photographer and has been covering Black Lives Matter in the United States, but also has done a lot of work in North Korea and around the world. So I think that's you would be enriched if you could spend time looking at some of their feeds. If you care to follow me at some point or wish to contact me directly, you can reach me on Instagram at Visual Whiplash, or you can email directly at info@robstacyphoto. And with that, I really just want to thank you for listening to some of the stories that I shared. I think that they are important because I think we so often, when we're on our way to our coffee or to some event, we are weaving through this universe and seeing people that we encounter as something to avoid. And I think that if we spent more time connecting, I think, we would be better off for it. So with that, I'm going to conclude the presentation part, but I think I'll open it up to questions, should there be any. So Christian, I'll turn it over to you at this point.
Yeah, perfect. So if anyone, a fantastic talk. Thank you very much for that, Robert. If anyone would like to add in some questions in the chat, we have plenty of time. Please let them all in. I'm sure Robert will be more than happy to answer any and all. Just to get the ball rolling in that sense, I have a question. I found it really interesting what you said about that aspect of, finding a way in to engage with them and almost letting them be disarmed enough to let you in to do that. Can I ask, in the process of that, do you usually first take the photo or pull the camera out, or do you first approach them and then at some point down the line bring up that aspect that you are a photojournalist and a photographer, and is there a almost a dynamic there where it if you leave it for too long, how early on, basically my question is, how early on do you kind of bring that in and kind of let them know about what you're doing? Or do you sometimes just kind of really just engage with them on a human level, and then the aspect of, oh, this would make a fantastic shot, or I'd love to take your portrait, that comes secondary? What's usually the process for that? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think it's variable because people are different. And so to a certain extent, it's about reading the room, so to speak. So it varies a lot. It's interesting that you should ask that question with this specific picture here. I, as a process, I always carry a camera. So when I start talking to people, I actually usually don't ask if I can take their picture most of the time. The picture of the man with the accordion was one instance where I did, but very often I'll just be talking to them, and then as they're talking, I'll just start taking pictures as they talk. And sometimes people will ask me what I'm doing, and then I'll explain. And sometimes, people just keep talking. So it sort of really depends. This picture specifically, actually, I was walking in my old neighborhood in Brooklyn because I was having a trip down memory lane. And I spotted these two girls, and they were walking down the street, and they were just super engaged. And I just sort of came up alongside of them. And it was really a quick moment where I shot that photo. And if you saw the next 2 or 3 frames, you can see the horror on their face as they realize that they're being photographed. But it really does vary because, each person has, I guess, a boundary, and, they'll, if they want to let you in, then it's very open. And but a lot of times, I just start as they're talking, and often nothing is said. So.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Robert. I hope that answered. Laura had the same question. Do you ask people's permission to take their photo or just go for it? And Karina had a kind of a spin on that. Would love to hear some of the ways you approach people you want to photograph. So if there are any others you haven't mentioned that come to mind, perhaps, that work as a hook.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would, I don't think of it maybe as a technique. I think it's more that it's scary to take pictures of strangers. I can also say that I've had people react very negatively to having their picture taken, to the point of physical violence, which has happened, 2 or 3 times. And I wouldn't have expected that reaction necessarily from the circumstance. But I think it's just more about, to a certain degree, what you're comfortable with in terms of reaching out to people. As I may have mentioned, a lot of times, like I don't smoke myself, but I do carry some spare cigarettes around. So that, if I see that the person's a smoker and so forth, I'll just, offer them a cigarette, and then we'll just start, chatting. And then, eventually I start taking pictures. And sometimes, if I feel a little more tension, then I might be careful and ask, just to make sure, because some people, can be pretty ominous feeling, and, you want to be respectful of that too. So maybe more of the same answer, but I think it's just very situational.